What happens when the most dangerous man in South Korea gets into a wedding car worth more than most people's homes, dressed for a ceremony 500 guests are already waiting for, and never makes it to the altar? What happens when the woman he thinks abandoned him is standing at a crosswalk instead? 3 sons at her side, one of them wearing his smile like it was carved for him. This story came to the vault from a place we don't often go. A crossing point in downtown Seoul, 9:47 in the morning, on the one day a man was supposed to become someone's husband. What happened in the next 90 seconds unraveled 10 years of lies, exposed a mother's darkest secret, and put a face, his own face, 3 times over, in front of a man who thought he already knew the shape of his own grief. This is a story about a man the underworld feared, standing frozen on a crosswalk, undone by 3 little boys he didn't know existed. Welcome back to Story Vault, the home of stories that pull you in, keep you up at night, and leave you wanting more. Family, if this is your first time here, settle in. What you're about to hear is one of the darkest, most emotional stories we've ever told. If you're watching this story, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and follow so you never miss what happens next. Let's see how far this story travels. Downtown Seoul, 9:47 in the morning. This is the moment Yoon Ji-hoon's life split in two. Not slowly, not gently, but the way a cliff gives way. Suddenly. Completely. Without a single warning. Outside the tinted windows of the convoy, Gangnam had turned into a spectacle. Thousands lined the streets. Cameras. Flowers. Children on shoulders straining for a glimpse of the man the tabloids called the Ghost of Yoon Group. The legitimate face of a family whose real business ran through the shadows of half the country. Banners stretched between buildings. Helicopters circled. 500 guests from 14 countries sat in white chairs at the Han River venue, champagne in hand, whispering about how fortunate Han Se-yeon was to be marrying into that kind of power. Yoon Ji-hoon was 38. 6 feet tall. The kind of wealthy that didn't need to be announced, because the silence around him did that work instead. His silence is not emptiness. It is a weapon. Loaded, patient, waiting. Men twice his age had learned not to test it. And yet, in the back of that car, in a suit worth more than a small apartment, a single pale rose pinned to his lapel, he felt nothing. Not nerves. Not joy. Just the same hollow ache that had lived behind his ribs for 10 years and never once packed its bags. His right hand, Park Ji-woo, sat across from him running through the day's timeline on a tablet. Up front, Cho Min-suk, head of his security, a man who had put down threats to the Yoon family without blinking, scanned the crowd through the window, one hand near his earpiece. 2 more vehicles trailed behind. Motorcycles flanked the convoy like an honor guard for a funeral no one had announced yet. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. The convoy slowed near Hanging Darrow, where the road widened before curving toward the river. Office workers crossed in waves. Mothers pushed strollers. Students walked in loud, laughing clusters. The ordinary rhythm of a city that didn't stop moving just because a dangerous man was getting married. Ji-hoon wasn't looking for anything. He was drowning quietly in the hollow feeling in his chest, and a suspicion he couldn't shake, that he was about to make the worst mistake of his life. Then he saw her. Cream blouse. Dark trousers. Natural hair pulled back from her face. A canvas bag on one shoulder. Older than he remembered. More settled into her own skin. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with time. Alexis Carter. His heart didn't just beat faster. It stopped. Beside her stood 3 boys, maybe 9 years old, dressed identically in white shirts and dark shorts, arguing the way only brothers argue. Loud, passionate, and without a trace of real anger. The tallest was pointing at something across the street. The middle one laughed with his whole body. The smallest tugged Alexis's sleeve and said something that made her smile. And when the tallest boy turned his head toward the road, Ji-hoon felt the air leave his lungs completely. The boy had his smile. Not similar. Not coincidence. The exact smile, the upward pull at the left corner, the narrowing of the eyes right before it arrived. The smile from the photograph his grandmother kept locked in a drawer. The smile his mother used to point to at dinner and call the Yoon bloodline. His hand found the door handle before a single coherent thought had formed in his mind. Sir. Park Ji-woo looked up from his tablet. Stop the car. We're on schedule, sir. The ceremony begins at. I said stop the car. Cho Min-suk turned from the front seat. Mr. Yoon, we're in the middle of a convoy. The press is. The door was already open. The noise of the city rushed in. Camera shutters, crowd noise, a helicopter somewhere overhead. He stepped out onto the road in an $11,000 suit and walked. straight toward the crosswalk, ignoring the gasps, ignoring his security scrambling out behind him, ignoring the explosion of flashes as reporters recognized him and surged in his direction. He saw only her. Alexis saw him in the same instant. She went completely still. The canvas bag slipped from her shoulder. She caught it on reflex, but her eyes never left his face. The three boys fell silent beside her, sensing the shift in her energy the way children always sense things before adults understand them. 10 years of silence. 10 years of unanswered questions. 10 years of waking at 3 in the morning and staring at the ceiling, wondering what he had done, what he had missed, what had gone so terribly wrong. They stared at each other across 3 feet of pavement while the city moved around them like water around 2 stones. Alexis. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes filled, but her jaw stayed set. The look of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and found every rehearsal useless now that it was real. Yihon. Just his name. Nothing else. His security formed a loose wall between them and the gathering crowd. Reporters pushed forward. Someone called his name. A drone appeared somewhere above them. Park Ji-woo hovered at his elbow, whispering urgently about optics and schedules. Ji-hoon heard none of it. He looked at the 3 boys watching him with enormous, careful eyes. Then back at Alexis, and asked the question that had followed him for 10 years like a shadow that never shortened, no matter how bright the sun got. Why did you leave me? Something moved across her face. Not quite anger, though anger sat underneath it. Not quite sadness, though that was there too. Something older and heavier. The look of someone who had carried an injustice so long it had simply become part of who she was. I didn't leave you, she said. Your mother made sure I had no choice. The ground disappeared beneath him. Family, if you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story we live for, so hit that subscribe button before we go any further, because it's about to get so much worse. What did you say? His voice barely carried. You heard me. Alexis wasn't crying anymore. She'd made a decision. He could see it settle into her. The decision to stop carrying this alone. Your mother made sure I had no choice. But Ji-hoon, her eyes flicked to the boys and back. We are not having this conversation on a public street while you're supposed to be getting married. Not like this. I'm not going anywhere. He said it like a man realizing how much of his life had already gone somewhere without him. Not until you tell me everything. She studied his face a long moment, then turned to the boys. Ethan, Elijah, Emmanuel, step back with Mr. Cho for a moment, please. Cho Min-suk, who had guarded this family through gang disputes and boardroom coups, and had long considered himself unshockable, looked thoroughly shocked. He moved to collect the boys without a word. Alexis took a slow breath. 10 years ago, your mother called me. Asked me to come to the house. You were in Busan for the merger conference, the one that ran 4 days. I remember, because I just found out I was pregnant. I was trying to find the right moment to tell you. I was terrified. And I was so happy, Ji-hoon. His chest tightened like a fist closing. When I got to the house, Madame Yoon was waiting in the sitting room. Composed. Polite, the way she always was when she'd already decided something, and was simply informing you of it. She had documents on the table. Told me you'd contacted a lawyer, that you wanted the marriage dissolved. Showed me papers with your signature. Text messages from your phone. Emails. Her hands tightened on the bag strap. Everything looked real. I was 26 alone in that house, and everything looked completely real. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I was too young, too frightened, and I loved you too much to believe you'd do that to me. But the evidence was right there. And she was so certain, so completely certain, that I started to believe I'd never really known you at all. He felt sick. Then she told me if I didn't leave quietly, she'd contact immigration. I was on a spousal visa, Ji-hoon. She knew exactly what that threat meant. She told me she'd make sure my family back home faced consequences. She told me she'd already spoken to people who could make that happen quietly. Her voice cracked, just slightly. She told me the kindest thing I could do for you was disappear. That you were embarrassed. That you'd moved on. That staying would only humiliate us both. The silence between them was total. The city kept moving. A horn somewhere, the crowd behind the security line growing, 2 police officers drawn by the commotion. Park Ji-woo on his phone, speaking fast. None of it existed to Ji-hoon. I left that night, Alexis continued. Flew to London, then to my aunt in Atlanta. $50 in my account. A pregnancy no one knew about. A marriage I believed was already over. She exhaled. I cried for 3 months straight. Then I decided crying wasn't going to raise 3 children, so I stopped. 3, he repeated, hollow. She nodded, eyes going to the boys, and the love in them was so enormous it made him ashamed of everything he'd had and never appreciated. I tried to reach you. You should know that. Letters. Emails. I even called you in group once, and pretended to be a client, just to get past reception. A painful, almost laugh. Every letter came back unopened. Every email bounced. Every call rerouted somewhere it never should have gone. I tried for 18 months before I accepted that whatever your mother told me about how you felt must have been true. She intercepted everything. He said it flatly, because the alternative was saying it with every emotion currently colliding inside his chest, and he didn't know how to do that in the middle of a public street. I worked that out 4 years ago, when Ethan started asking about his father, and I went digging through old email routing, and found something that didn't add up. She stopped. By then it felt too late. You had your life. I had mine. The boys were fine. I told myself it was better left alone. It wasn't better. No, she agreed quietly. It wasn't. Then the smallest boy, Emmanuel, pulled free of Cho Min-suk's loose supervision and walked straight up to Ji-hoon, looked up with his mother's eyes and his father's face, and asked with the total fearlessness only a 9-year-old can manage, "Are you really our dad?" The question hit like a physical blow. Ji-hoon crouched down, right there on the pavement, in a wedding suit that suddenly felt like a costume from someone else's life. "Yes," he managed. "I think I am." Emmanuel considered this with great seriousness, then nodded once, like confirming a suspicion. "Mom has a photo of you. From when you were younger. Ethan says you look different now, because rich people age differently, but I think you just look older." Somewhere behind him, Cho Min-suk made a sound suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. Ji-hoon looked up at Alexis. One hand was pressed over her mouth, her eyes brimming. He stood, slowly, looked at Ethan, watching him from a careful distance with guarded, measuring eyes. Looked at Elijah, close to his mother, cautious and neutral. Looked at Emmanuel, now studying the rose on his father's lapel, with total scientific focus. Then he turned to Park Ji-woo, who wore the expression of a man watching an extremely expensive ship sail directly into an iceberg. "Yivo. Sir, the ceremony's in 40 minutes. If we leave now, we can still call the venue." "Sir?" "Call the venue, Ji-woo." His voice stayed level. "Cancel the wedding." The words landed and just sat there. Park Ji-woo stared. Cho Min-suk turned around fully. Even Emmanuel looked up from the rose. "Mr. Yoon." Ji-woo's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "There are 500 guests. There are 12 news channels broadcasting live. Ms. Han is already at the venue. Your mother is. Cancel it." Same absolute calm. And that was when Park Ji-woo understood his employer had never been more serious about anything in his life. "Call Se-yeon directly. Tell her I need to speak with her privately. Tell her I'm sorry, and that I'll explain everything, but cancel the ceremony. Now, Ji-woo." At the venue, the first sign something was wrong came when the groom's assistant called and asked the coordinator to pause the processional music. Han Se-yeon stood in the bridal suite in front of a floor-length mirror, wearing a gown 8 months and 6 designers in making, when her own assistant knocked twice and entered with a face that said everything before a word came out. "What happened?" It wasn't a question. "Ms. Han. Mr. Yoon has called. He's asking to postpone the ceremony. Says it's urgent, that he'll explain everything in person." Se-yeon looked at her reflection a long moment. Behind her, 3 bridesmaids went silent. The makeup artist set down her brush. "Postpone," she repeated. "Yes, miss. Or, cancel." He used the word postpone. His tone suggested cancel. Se-yeon reached up and touched the pearl necklace at her throat. A gift from Ji-hoon's grandmother, given with a warmth Se-yeon had always sensed was more performance than truth. "All right. Get me my phone, please." Outside, 500 guests were told the ceremony was experiencing a brief delay. That polite fiction lasted about 4 minutes before footage began circulating online. Ji-hoon stepping out of the limousine, standing at the crosswalk with a woman, crouching down to speak with 3 boys. Who looked, to anyone paying attention, remarkably like a younger version of Yoon Ji-hoon. The internet had theories within the hour. By evening, the theories were headlines. At the Yoon family compound on the northern edge of the city, Madame Yoon sat in her private study watching the footage, with a stillness her staff had long since learned to fear. Her secretary stood near the door, silent. A half-finished cup of tea cooled on the desk. She had spent 10 years making sure this exact problem never resurfaced. She was beginning to understand she hadn't worked hard enough. Ji-hoon arrived 2 hours later, alone except for Cho Min-suk. He hadn't gone back to the venue. His call with Se-yeon had been brief, painful, and more honest than their entire 2-year engagement had ever managed to be. Madam Yoon waited in the main sitting room. The same room, he realized as he crossed the threshold, where she'd once sat across from a terrified 26-year-old and dismantled her life with forged signatures and quiet threats. 64 years old, posture impeccable, pale gray suit, hair set precisely. She looked at her son with an expression that was equal parts fury and the first tremor of something close to fear. You have humiliated this family. Hello, mother. He sat across from her. He decided on the drive over he wouldn't raise his voice. She had already taken enough from him. He wasn't giving her his composure too. I spoke with Young Mi-ra. 22 years in this household. She'd been working here the day Madam Yoon sat in this very room with Alexis Carter. Mi-ra is staff, Madam Yoon said coolly. Whatever she told you, she told me about the documents. Witnessed you having them prepared. He set his phone on the table between them, a recording open on the screen. She also told me about the investigator you hired to monitor Alexis's email for 18 months. She kept records, mother. 22 years in this house, and she watched what you did, and she kept records because she didn't know what else to do with the truth. The temperature in the room dropped. I did what was necessary. You forged my signature. Still calm. Still quiet. Somehow worse than shouting. On divorce papers. You threatened my wife with deportation. You cut off every attempt she made to reach me for over a year. All while I was in Busan, closing a merger that made this family $300 million. I spent a year thinking I'd driven her away. Another year trying to understand what I'd done. And 8 years learning to live inside an emptiness that was never supposed to be there. She was not suitable. She was my wife. For words, and they were enough, because they were true. Yihon. Something shifted in her voice. The frost thinning. Not into regret. Not yet, but into the recognition that the ground beneath her was moving. You were 27. Infatuated. These things pass. I have 3 sons. He watched her face. Something crossed it, controlled fast, but not fast enough. You knew, he said, that she was pregnant when she left. Or you suspected. Silence. You suspected. And you let her go anyway. Madam Yoon looked away, toward the window, the garden, the city beyond it. Her folded hands tightened. I thought. I don't want to know what you thought. He stood. I want you to understand what you did. You separated me from my wife. 3 children from their father. You manufactured 10 years of absence out of nothing. And you watched me be unhappy for every one of those years. And you said nothing. Not once. I asked you across that dinner table 100 times if you had any idea why she left. And you looked me in the eye and said nothing. I was protecting. You were controlling. No heat behind it. Just fact. You've been controlling since the day I was born, and I let it happen because I believed you saw things I couldn't. That the pain you caused came from love. But there is no version of love that looks like this. No version of protection that requires a man to spend 10 years alone, and 3 boys to grow up without a father. He turned toward the door. Yihon. Something raw broke into her voice for the first time. He stopped without turning. I believed I was doing what was right. For the family. For you. I genuinely believed that. He was quiet a moment. I know you did, he said finally. That's somehow the worst part of all of it. He walked out. In the weeks that followed, the story became impossible to contain. Financial press covered the collapse of the alliance between Yoon Group and the Han family, the market tremor, the emergency board session. Entertainment press ran the romance angle relentlessly. The crime boss, the American ex-wife, the triplets, the wedding that never happened. Every platform had a theory. Every theory had an audience. Ji-hoon ignored all of it. He rented a house in Mapo, a quiet residential pocket Alexis had settled into years earlier, chosen for good schools and a nearby park and a total absence of anyone who cared whether he ran a criminal empire or sold vegetables for a living. He enrolled the boys in the local school. He learned which aisle at the corner market had the noodles Elijah liked, and which had the cereal Emmanuel refused to eat without a specific spoon. The first time he sat down to help Ethan with math homework, Ethan folded his arms across the kitchen table, jaw set at an angle so precisely his father's own that Ji-hoon had to look away for a moment to compose himself. You don't have to do this, Ethan said. I know. Your mother managed everything fine without me. Yes, she did. That doesn't mean I don't want to be here now. Ethan turned his pencil over in his fingers. Why weren't you here before? It was the question that mattered, the one that deserved a real answer, not a comfortable one. Because someone made sure I didn't know you existed, Ji-hoon said. And I'm not going to lie to you, and pretend I'm not angry about that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, Ethan. That's what I can give you. I can't get back the time that's gone. I can only be here for what's left. Ethan studied him a long moment, his mother's eyes, watchful, measuring, generous only in their own time. Then he uncapped his pencil and slid the textbook across the table, pointing at question 7. Progress. Elijah came to it quietly, the way he came to everything, thoughtful, private, processing before he allowed himself to feel. 3 weeks after the move, on a Sunday morning while Alexis was out buying groceries and the boys were supposedly in the garden, but actually inside watching television, Elijah sat beside his father on the sofa and asked, without looking at him, "Do you love our mom?" Ji-hoon turned off the television. "Yes," he said. "I have loved your mother since I was 24 years old. I never stopped. Not for a single day of the 10 years I didn't know where she was." Elijah nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting to hear it said plainly. 6 months later, on a quiet evening in the Mapo house, with the boys asleep and the city outside finally still, Ji-hoon stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Alexis at the stove, humming something he half remembered from a decade ago, in a life he'd almost lost for good. He thought about the crosswalk, about the exact smile on his son's face, about how close he'd come to signing his life over to the wrong version of it. In a ceremony, 500 people had been ready to applaud. She turned and caught him watching. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. I think I finally understand what a miracle looks like. It looks exactly like this kitchen." She smiled. The radiant girl he remembered, 10 years older, unbroken. And for the first time in a decade, the hollow place behind his ribs was quiet. "Family, that's where we leave the Yoon family tonight. Not at an altar, not at a headline, but in a small kitchen in Mapo, where a man who once controlled an empire finally learned what it meant to just show up. If this story moved you, share it with one person who needs a story tonight. Drop a comment and let us know. Should we go back to that crosswalk and give you Se-yeon's side of what happened after the camera stopped rolling? I'm your host. This is Story Vault, and we're just getting started.